So before I get started, can I just get a show of hands? How many of you work in a parish or mission or campus ministry setting? Okay, how many of you are diocesan? And how many of you would class yourself as an organization? Okay, so split pretty evenly. That is good. So my next question for you all is, what sort of emails do you send regularly? Just anything that you regularly send out to your parish, your diocese, or those affiliated with your organization?
Weekly newsletter.
Weekly newsletter, probably a really common one. What else?
News blast.
A news blast, weekly or monthly? How often?
Whenever they come up.
Okay.
Probably every other week.
Special events items.
Special events items.
Death notices.
Death notices, yeah. We see a lot of those come through. Fundraising, I'm glad you said that. What else?
Birth
Monthly
announcements.
Birth announcements.
Monthly newsletter to my communicators.
Awesome. Monthly newsletter to communicators because you're on the diocesan level. What else?
I send out a monthly study guide listing all the Bible study groups and all of the books, clubs, and everything else and what they're studying that particular month.
Okay, and were you parish or diocese?
Parish.
Parish, so like a kind of a monthly roundup of all the different Christian ed options. Does anyone send something specific for children and youth ministry?
Yes, we do that.
Anyone have a preschool and things go out to the preschool or the day school parents?
They're a separate entity for that.
Separate entity. Okay, some people maybe are in a situation though where that also falls on their plate. What about reminders to the people serving on the altar, acolytes, people who are reading? Yeah. What about reminders specifically to your vestry? And what about emails to the clergy in the diocese? Okay. What about emails just to the retired clergy in the diocese?
We send emails to our alumni because I'm from the seminary.
Okay, yeah, that's another great example. So the reason I wanted to get that list going, I knew everyone would sort of immediately say e-news, but then I also wanted you to think through all of the different things that you might be sending out in your church or diocese. A couple I didn't hear, convention-related emails. In the Diocese of North Carolina, we have a whole separate list just for convention delegates so that we're not flooding everyone else's inbox with that. I know some churches have sort of a concert or public event series. Maybe that doesn't just go to people in your parish, so you need to be thinking a little bit differently about that messaging if it's going to folks who are just related to you through that one series of events that are maybe a little bit more public-facing. Some churches I know literally just send out the weekly lectionary with maybe a couple sentences from the rector just saying, please consider this before you come to church on Sunday. Special messages from clergy or on the diocesan level, special messages from the bishop. Notices to various committees, deans, vestries, seasonal offerings, fundraisers. Some churches just do prayer list. I wanted to get us thinking about email messaging beyond just the e-news, because there's actually a whole lot going out from your office. Maybe it's not going out specifically from you, and maybe a lot of these different things are lumped together. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you want to consider separating those out and really thinking about the cohesive, coherent strategy for all of the different types of emails that you are sending all the time. I don't suppose there's like a clicker anywhere.
I can get you one.
Awesome, that would be amazing. So, cool. So while they're getting me set up with that equipment, just in general, when you're receiving emails from a company, from a brand that you follow, what sort of things do you like in those emails?
Sales.
Sales, right? If it says 40% off coupon, you know that I'm going to click on it. What else?
Brevity.
Brevity, right?
Or direct, being direct.
Very direct, right? You don't have to read through 3 paragraphs of flowery writing to get to the point, which is there's a 40% off sale, which they should have just said in the subject line to begin with.
Good news.
Good news? Yeah.
Relevant to me specifically.
Something relevant to you specifically. Okay, so if you have kids who are in the preschool and you're getting information about the service for high school seniors, maybe that's not exactly what you're looking for. Other thoughts? So the same things that you're looking for in the emails that you receive from brands or organizations are the exact same thing members of your audience are also looking for. They are looking for something that's relevant to them, something that feels like it's personalized. Maybe it has your name on it, maybe it doesn't, but it's certainly content that has meaning in your life. It's content that is going to be useful to you in some way. You don't feel obligated to read the Target circular if you're not planning to go to Target or you don't need anything from the furniture sale. You just delete it and move on. your audience is going to do the exact same thing. If they're not particularly interested in the concert series and you send them a lot of concert series emails, those are just going to go to the trash, and maybe they end up unsubscribing from that email list, and then maybe they just unsubscribe from you altogether because they're just tired of dealing with the number of emails that they receive. So it's important to be thoughtful about what we're sending to whom. Oh, that's awesome. So these are links to 2 different emails that are sent out by churches in my diocese. Instead of clicking on them, I'm going to show you screenshots just because I know the internet was so questionable earlier. I just decided to make that last minute change. So St. Timothy's is one of our churches. It is a large church in Winston-Salem. They are Anglo-Catholic and very open about their identity. They believe a lot in the beauty of holiness, and they are very serious about the ideas of adoration, formation, and transformation. I really like the emails that they send out. You can see I grabbed these screenshots from my phone about 45 minutes ago. Again, I was a little concerned about the internet issue. And at the top, they have, this has a pointer on it. At the top, they would have their seal. I didn't get that in the screenshot. They immediately have a couple of things you need to know. You can tell that this was one sent out during Holy Week, right? The thing that people really need to know is when are the services. I know they're probably not the regular time. Just give that to me. They have quick links on, this isn't actually shining on there at all, is it? Okay. Their
It
quick
doesn't
links.
reflect off that screen.
Yeah. Their quick links will just take them down to take the reader down to different parts of the email. It looks a little bit different when you look at it on your desktop or your laptop. They're spread out differently. And that's something I just want to call out right now. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But when you're designing emails that you intend for people to click on links, make sure that those links are easy to click on. If I'm doing it on my phone, I want to be able to do it with one thumb so I can just reach across and get it. I don't want to have 5 tiny little text links right next to each other, so I'm hitting any one of those 5 when I try to click on just one of them. The next thing that St. Timothy's does in its email is it always has the collect for that upcoming Sunday. Again, this very much fits with their identity, which is a congregation really intentionally focused on worship. Not that all of our congregations aren't, but we all know that some congregations put that more front and center in what they actually talk about in their ongoing communications. You can see that the photos that they select, it's muted, it's sepia toned, it's a very formal, reverent looking photo, very much fits with their Anglo-Catholic identity. And my church, this photo wouldn't necessarily fit as well. The church that I personally go to is more focused on drawing in a lot of young families. Again, it's not that all churches aren't trying to do all these things, but they put forward more of the brand identity of being a place that is young, that is family friendly, that is colorful and outgoing and really exuberant. Then each section of St. Timothy's email is labeled by the adoration, formation, transformation, and it includes a couple of related events. It includes some writing from various people on staff. You can see their choir director, their curate. I don't think I grabbed the screenshot of transformation. I was running out of time a little bit. But what I like is, again, this email is so on brand because the adoration, formation, transformation is in everything St. Timothy's does, and that carries all the way to their weekly e-news. And they make it very clear what information belongs in what section. So the reason I wanted to highlight this church is they do such a good job of knowing their audience. And again, this is probably not what every church email is going to look like, every weekly e-news, but it is a perfect fit for what this church is doing, both in terms of content, in terms of organization, and in terms of the visual branding. I'm going to pause for a minute. Does anyone have questions or comments? And I will just say that I taught high school for 3 years, so if you think you have a dumb question, I guarantee you I have heard dumber. So don't be shy. Go for it.
In emails, sometimes you see click here, or sometimes people just hyperlink.
Yeah.
To what extent today do you think you need to still say click here, or if you just have it blue and underlined, people intuitively know that that is a hyperlink?
If you have it blue and underlined, people should intuitively know that's a hyperlink. Yeah. Does anyone have different opinions about that,
Well, I just
or
think
different
that's
thoughts?
about knowing your audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes, in some of the emails I send, that's okay, but then I have a whole nother, if I'm sending to my retired clergy, I'm definitely
Yep.
saying,
Yeah.
click here.
Right.
With the mouse, not your finger, you know?
Right. And that is a good point, all about knowing your audience.
I was gonna agree
Yeah.
with, just echo that yeah, with some of the older
Right.
people that we have in our audience, we
Right.
have to kind of specify where to click, yeah.
Yeah.
But I still think you need to have a call to action though.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You just can't like throw a link on there and assume who, you know. So, I mean, it is click here, but you are asking them to.
Register,
or
you know,
to
learn
register.
Follow the
more.
link below.
Exactly. Something like that. Yep. Anything else at this point? Okay. So the other example is from another church in my diocese. This is St. Michael's in Raleigh. And this is a seasonal email that they send out. They have a writing group that started out as an adult Sunday school class where people just wanted to learn spiritual writing. And now it's so popular that they have an entire Lenten series of parishioners who write a short reflection every single day. This is only a section of one of the reflections. The entire text of whatever that day's reflection is just in the email. The intent being that whoever is opening it is going to read the reflection. So there's really no need to then make them click somewhere else to finish reading it. I'm sure they have it housed somewhere on their website, but in terms of the email itself, I'll talk later about in a big email that's a collection of a lot of different events. You do want to have short blurbs with links to the more information. But in a case like this, I think it's more appropriate to just put the entire short reflection in the email itself instead of making people click around for it. And sometimes it'll have a picture, and then down at the bottom it says who wrote it. This one, I believe, was written by the rector's wife, which is not why I chose it, it's just by happenstance. All right, so we've already started to get to this point about knowing your audience. And the questions to ask yourself is, who is reading these emails? If your answer is everybody in the church, I would encourage you to think about that again. I do think in the instance of a weekly e-news, it is reasonable to think about that audience as being the entire church. But then you have to ask yourself the question, is everything in this email relevant to the entire church? If 3/4 of the email is EYC updates, then I think you really need to ask yourself the question of whether or not you need to be sending that to the rest of the church. The answer to that is no, you should be sending that just to the parents of youth and children who are in the age ranges that your EYC covers. That doesn't mean that you would never include an announcement from Youth and Children's Ministry in your larger e-news. It just means you would say, hey, remember the spaghetti dinner's coming up, come out to support the youth. Or hey, the youth are doing a fundraiser. Or remember the youth are leading the services on Sunday, so be sure to get there and show your support for the young people. The next question is who is not reading the emails and why. This is one of the questions we get a lot from parishes in the Diocese of North Carolina, which is, I spend a lot of time making this e-news. 20% of the people in my congregation are subscribed to it. I think they just don't do email. I think I shouldn't do this anymore. So it is possible, as we've called out, that you might be in a congregation where people really don't do email. If that is the case, then it's worth inquiring whether or not email messaging should be your main strategy. In most congregations, though, most people probably do email in that they have an email address that they check with some regularity. The question is whether or not what you are sending them is providing them with some sort of value. So just like we were talking about earlier, what kind of emails do you want to receive? They're things that are relevant to you. I know that I'm kind of repeating that a lot, but that is really the key to any communications plan, is making sure you know who your audience is, you know what they need, and then meeting those needs. The way to find out who's not reading your emails and why is to ask people directly. That's more for the why part. You should already know who's not reading your emails because you have metrics that you can look at, you have analytics that you can figure it out. The why can be more difficult though. You can do focus groups to start talking to people in your congregation. You can do a congregation-wide survey. You can just kind of pull people aside and ask them. There's a lot of different ways to gather that information, depending on the amount of time and resources you have to put toward answering that question. And I would say it's a question well worth putting the time and resources toward answering. You need to ask the question of how many audiences you really have. We talked about that a lot with the first couple slides, all the different emails that you're sending out. You're really talking to a lot of different segments of this general population that's affiliated with your church, your diocese, your organization. And then how often do those people want to receive emails, and how many of them do they want to receive? That's a question that really depends a lot on what it is you're sending. So I know a lot of churches and dioceses do a weekly e-news. If you have enough information that changes from week to week to justify that, by all means, send it out once a week so people always have that reminder right in front of them. Send it out Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday. Those are the 3 days I see it most often, just to remind people in the middle of the week of their connection to the church, remind them that Sunday is coming up, remind them that whatever event is happening. If you really don't have enough events happening and enough changing information to give people new content every week, don't send it every week. Look at doing it bi-weekly, look at doing it monthly. If you're a very small congregation or just a congregation that is really well established and really just has kind of Sunday school, maybe Wednesday worship, and then your 2 regular Sunday worships without a lot of events that are changing at other times, maybe you just contact them once a month to talk about the upcoming liturgical season or to have a message from your rector or vicar. Same thing on the diocesan level, just scaled up. Do you have enough content to justify sending people an email every week? So all of this is getting to the idea of list segmentation. If you think to yourself, I have my email list, and that is sort of the full stop, then this is really the set of slides for you. So list segmentation really just means that you're sending the right information to the people who need it when they need it. So all those different groups we talked about earlier, all should be segmented out. This is what we do in the Diocese of North Carolina. We have our weekly e-news. That goes out to whomever wants to subscribe. It is a mix of clergy and lay. And I want to talk a little bit about whether or not, if you're on the diocesan level, you should separate out your clergy and your lay email lists for the e-news. But I'm going to put a pin in that just for now. We have a children's and youth ministry list. That goes out once every 3 weeks. That schedule is not quite as regular. It's driven a little bit by the seasonal events that they do. We have a list just of annual convention delegates. We have a list of people who have attended clergy conference. Those lists get changed every year as registrations for clergy conference changes or as the different churches are electing their delegates to annual convention. We have a mass clergy list that's just all of the clergy who are canonically resident and licensed. The bishop assistant keeps track of that because all of that licensing goes through her, so she is the person best qualified to keep track of that. We have that specific retired clergy list. We have 7 deans of our convocations. They're their own list. We have a diocesan staff list. We have lists for a couple different diocesan committees. We had a different list for the special electing convention. That was a year where we had 2 conventions in one year, so 2 different lists going. Ordination and consecration attendees was a whole separate thing. As you may or may not know, North Carolina just went through a bishop search. And so after we elected the bishop, we then had to keep track of all the people he wanted to invite and whether or not they were coming, so that took a whole separate email list. We have a church communicators list. Nicole, you said you send out a monthly blast to your communicators. We do the same thing. A church administrators list where our canon for finance basically sends out a monthly email to all of the parish administrators. We have a deacon list, which is maintained by our archdeacon. We have a list of people who are licensed to do safe church training, so not receive the training, but actually teach the training. Our youth ministry department takes care of that, along with the children's and youth ministry list. And then we have a supply clergy list, so that our different parishes can ask for supply clergy when they need them. So that's a lot of lists. And you might be wondering, well, that's on the diocesan level. A parish wouldn't possibly have that many lists. I beg to differ. Your parish might not have all of these, but I bet that if you are a parish with an ASA over, let's say, 200 or 300, that there's a good chance you have a lot of these. So again, you might have a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly e-news. You might send out the lectionary every week. And I want to say, I'm not necessarily prescribing that you have all of these. Again, it depends on the needs of your congregation. I just want to help you think about the different audiences that you may or may not be reaching. Maybe some you want to reach, maybe some you know just are not in your church. Probably some sort of children's and youth ministry, probably a list of people who are on the rota to be acolytes and lectors and servers, and you want to make sure that they come on their appropriate Sunday. You might need to email just your vestry. A lot of churches might have a prayer list that might be combined with your regular e-news. Some churches send it out separately. If we want, we can have a conversation about why you might choose one or the other. If you have a preschool or a day school, it might be a separate entity. A lot of churches, I know it still falls under their parish admin to handle those communications. Maybe you need a Spanish language email. That's something that, quite honestly, in the Diocese of North Carolina, we probably need and we don't have yet, because we don't yet have the capacity on staff for a communications person who can write and be culturally competent in Spanish. Seasonal offerings like the one I showed you from St. Michael's, probably at some point have to send out inclement weather notices, capital campaign and annual campaign, concert series, community events. I didn't include fundraising on the list, but obviously if you're working with an organization or with a school that has alumni where you're doing a ton of fundraising, I'm sure you have your own fundraising lists, and hopefully it's segmented in such a way that you can identify who first-time donors are, who lapsed donors are, who the people that are donating on a monthly basis are, who your like really big donors are, you know, the ones who get the special handwritten thank you note. So in terms of how you figure out to actually segment your list, I think the first step is to go through and just look at the emails you and everyone else on your staff is already sending. This doesn't mean like ask for every personal email. This doesn't mean ask people to forward you, everything they've sent in the last week. But just ask your staff, who are the groups that you email on a regular basis? Do you have some idea of when you are sending those emails? Do you have some idea of how big those lists are? And what sort of content are you sending them? Once you've gathered up that data, you can start identifying where the gaps are. Again, if you're doing like a congregational communication survey or just trying to gather some feedback through listening groups, that's when you can ask, what is it you want to be hearing from our church, our diocese, our organization that you're not currently hearing? Once you've gathered up all that information, you can compare what people want, what you're currently sending, where the gaps are in the people that you know are somewhere out there connected to your organization in some way, but who nobody is emailing or nobody is contacting, and then build your plan from there. Any questions about this list segmentation part? Has anyone thought about this like in a really deliberate way in their own context? Yeah, kind of a mixture of nods and maybe I'm thinking about it part way, but haven't thought about it in quite this way.
Well, going back to the previous screen, the diocesan, I probably
Yeah.
have most of those lists.
Right.
Set up. I think for me, the struggle is we use constant contact to use like our newsletters, our official mailings, where I actually need to track that somebody opened it, did it bounce, what's going on. But a lot of the other communications that come out of our office just come from our Gmail account. So I feel like I spend a really large amount of time reconciling who should be on the list first, in constant contact, and then adjusting it in my email, and then adjusting it in my bishop's email, and my other canon's email. So that's very frustrating.
Yeah. Are you working from a centralized database in any way?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes it harder. Like in our case, some of this work is spread out among the staff. So I called out a couple that were kept specifically by individuals who have ownership over that area. But like, for example, with the annual convention delegates, every year once all of those registrations have come in, we have our database manager just pull all of that for us. And so he's in charge of that list. And I don't know what situation you're in, but are there others who can help you with that, or it's just really you?
No, it's just really me. What database do you use? Like, how do you handle that?
We use ACS. I am not at all involved in the database decision or really the management of the database, so that is not an area where I can talk a lot about. But do other people have databases that they have found integrate really well with either an e-news system or like an email marketing system, or just that you find easy to work with to export what you need?
Same as your situation, I didn't pick ACS, but
Yeah.
that's what we have, and ACS, if you build your database right and you identify the people correctly,
Right.
you'll pull a list and you can export it directly from ACS into constant contact.
But you still have to maintain it in ACS and export it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no direct link. Like, you could set up a Google group and put all these people in a Google group and send the email straight to the Google group.
Right.
Because we have a
Well,
Gmail-based
so
system.
when we're sending our emails. So the weekly e-news list, for example, is something that is maintained in Constant Contact, which we use as our email marketing. So we're only like building a new list really when it's tied to a specific event. And the rest of the time, we just have to do the tagging within the email marketing system. And definitely this question of like making systems talk and what is the best way to work across systems when different people are in charge of different things is a really valuable and important one. What were you about to
So
say?
we don't use this word Shelby right now in MailChimp, which don't talk to each other.
Right.
But currently, I mean, one of the things that I've looked at doing is moving to Salesforce, which
Right.
Which
Yep.
syncs both ways with MailChimp. I sort of assume Constant Contact, but I don't know.
Right.
So that, mostly for that reason, because it talks to a lot of things.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think there's definitely a point when you might need to start talking about using an actual CRM system. Yeah. So I'm going to, yeah.
To get out of the technical and back into
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
philosophical.
Philosophical.
I had, when I took over this job 5 years ago, there was just one list. And one list got every message that anybody wanted to send.
Right.
So it was clear that that was did not describe to the principle that you've already described, which I believe fundamentally is how people want information.
Right.
And that is, they only want the stuff that's relevant to them.
Exactly.
So I accordioned out the list, the main list, into a variety of other content areas. And then I let people choose what areas
Yeah.
they wanted to be in. So on the one hand, we push our list from a database out to the tool. And we do that on a regular basis for the hygiene, and we watch our bounces,
Right.
and we subtract our bounces and make sure that, the list that's
Fantastic.
living on top of any of these emails is a
Right.
list that's as correct as we can make it on
Right.
that particular day. But we also let people choose their way in from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has made our lists a lot more dynamic. I mean, it's one thing to have everybody in the single list, and our big list is about 2,100, 2,200 people.
Right.
But we have lists that are 1,400 people. They don't want to hear about this, they want to
Right.
hear about that. But they want to
Yeah.
hear about that every time it happens.
Right. And we're in the same situation. We have the lists that are over 1,000 people. We have the lists that are literally 7 people. And in your own context, you need to sort of decide how small of a list is too small. And those people might just need to get a regular email if you need to let them know something. You had a,
No, I was just going to say, it was my approach early on to make it easy for anybody who's a director or related to a program who needed to send emails to use the tool.
right.
So that we could lift it out of the house email system. We are
Right.
Microsoft. We're a Microsoft user. And because we didn't want everything to live that way, because then you have this tremendous bounce back and
Right.
bounce off issue,
Right.
which clutters up the interior email systems.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was the better thing to do. And again, some people are more friendly to that help, and some people aren't.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing sort of the thought process that went behind what you did and some of the reasoning that you used to help make that change happen.
Potentially stupid question.
Nope. Taught high
So-
school, again, it's not going to be
our
stupid.
admin is in charge of ACS.
Mhm.
I don't want to have anything to do with it because it's just too much information. But do you have to, every time something's updated in ACS, do you have to physically tell it to, update Constant Contact, or like an export, or is there anything automatic about it?
So not between those two systems, no.
There's not. I mean,
Not that I mean, if there is, please someone tell me. Yeah.
There's no automatic integration that will
Right.
push that information from your database to Constant Contact, and that's an ACS discussion that you have to have with your sales rep.
Yeah.
And say that this is a product that you're looking for,
Right.
and that pushes it up on their priority
Mm-hmm.
list.
because at this point, she's updating ACS, and then she goes to Constant
Yeah.
Contact and updates it there. When we get an updated email or a new parishioner or whatever, it
Yep.
seems really painful.
Yes. I wish I had a nice answer to say, here's the button to push and it'll do it for you. Does anyone feel like they have a really good system where your database is talking really well to your email marketing, or your CRM, or whatever it is you're using? No? Go for it.
We're building one with the foundation, St. Francis Foundation. We're not, a church or a diocese, and we're, operating 6 states and 3 countries
Yeah.
and 1,200, whatever. And when I got there, it was like,
there was no email thing. I mean, we did the first team, we had a list of like 200. But we went from one fundraising software platform to another, and each time we make that change, the same thing, how do we talk? So, well, we have a
Right.
system, and their systems are always like Constant Contact was 10 years ago. They're usually antiquated. We went to Donor Perfect.
Yeah.
But now we have, our own IT team of a dozen guys, and, so they're building something so that it will do that, so that it will push the information up and come back.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see it happen, because every time we do something, we just go to the database person and say, this is the list, this is the pool we need, and she just uploads it. So we have hundreds of lists, because each list is new and fresh each time.
So a system that I use in my volunteer life is something called Nation Builder. It does donor management. It does email marketing. It allows you to do actually a lot of different forms of communication, also donor database and website all on one platform. I don't know of any churches that are using it, but it is something that has worked really well for this small nonprofit, the board of which I sit on. So I would throw that out there as if you are just sort of completely fed up with your system and just want to start looking at other options. That is one that, again, I don't really know of churches using, but it works really well and addresses a lot of the issues that people are talking about. So it might be worth looking into. Any more on this topic of list segmentation and making things talk to each other? Okay. So talking a little bit about list management now, which we've already been talking about who is managing the list. And I think in a lot of instances it does turn into this sort of distribution of labor, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Like, we all have limited amounts of time. And I know that people who are serving as both database manager and communications, like, that is a huge job. And so in some ways I'm sure it's easier for you. In some ways I'm sure you really wish you had someone else to take half of that work and use it as a separate position. I wanted to approach this question a little more, actually that's my second bullet, a little more from the standpoint of who actually gets to email the list. Who has access? Who do these emails come from? So in our case in the diocese, anything coming from the main e-news, anything coming from one of the conventions or something about a special event, all of that comes from the communications department. Children's and youth ministry, we built the template for them. And in an ideal world, we would get to do kind of a final pass on editing before it went out. We have not yet gotten to that point. But they actually load that information themselves. And we have coordinated when those emails go out so that they are on a regular schedule. Anything that goes out to the deans or the clergy comes only from the bishop's assistant. Every organization has sort of things that they've inherited. Someone in the past maybe who sent an inappropriate number of emails to the clergy list, and so now you are very, very careful with the clergy list. That is the scenario in which we are in. So I don't necessarily say that that is the absolute ideal way to handle it, but there are going to be situations where different people feel like they should have ownership of different lists for reasons both good and maybe just historic, and finding a way to just set those norms and get everyone on board and make it very clear when emails are sent out, to whom they are sent, who gets to send them, and generally how those emails are formatted. If you're using an email marketing system like MailChimp, set up the templates for every department or for every group so that you have that consistency. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts about how they handle teams of people who are all responsible for sending different types of content?
I'm actually just curious, with I'm trying to rebrand and
Right.
gather all of the different email threads that all our different offices send their departments send out. How do you kind of balance that, the desire for those places to have their own look and yet still maintain some brand consistency?
Yeah, it can be difficult. We do it a lot through the colors, actually. We pull colors from our diocesan shield. They're colors that most people like. They're a nice blue and a nice red and a little bit of yellow in there. And so that tends to fit most people's needs. We've talked a lot with different groups just about how we communicate. So talking some about content and setting up some content guidelines is also really helpful, in addition to establishing the visual identity. And then also having the consistent typeface. So, yeah.
We did the same. We have a parishioner who's a long and well-experienced graphic designer, and he sits on our communications committee, and he's anointed as the brand steward
Right.
for the church, and so
Yeah.
everything new gets a look from him. He may not be determinant, but he at least is
Right.
a mentor. I've tried to set my own
Right.
office myself up as a mentor, and we will build the look, and then we have somebody else who's sending
Yeah.
the content through. I don't exercise any editorial interference at the time that the content is provided, but I always look at our sense, and I'm always on the list, so I get the email, I can see how it looks when it arrives, and at that point I can intercede as a mentor. Here's something you may want to think about.
Right.
We don't do these, we don't
Yes.
put that many pictures in that one space,
Right.
those kinds of things. So that way we train as necessary, as opposed to trying to impose some strict brand standard.
Yeah. And I appreciate you making that point about stepping in as a mentor when necessary. I think especially if you're setting up a new norm, it is really important to continually go back and say, like, we set up the template. That doesn't mean that you get to make every third block lime green. I know that you like how it looks, but it's not what we look. That is not our look. That is not our brand, our visual identity. Go for it.
Yeah, what are some ideas that you have for templates? Because I know that like some of our staff likes to brand every single event, and I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think it should be just a certain template for, say, clergy conference, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no, I do know what you mean. So I think that's a good question. I think it depends on how unique each event is. So for example, in our diocese, we have the Happening program. It's a youth ministry program. It is always a butterfly. That is their logo. The color of the butterfly sometimes changes. And so that might change from year to year, but the overall branding, like...
you have a butterfly template for that every year.
Right. Alternately, so we had 2 bishop consecrations happen within 3 years of each other because we elected a suffragan, then we elected a diocesan. Those had 2 different visual identities. Those are both very special monumentous events in the life of the church that just happened to be happening really close to each other. But we did not choose to just superimpose the identity from one to the other.
They're ephemeral too. I mean, they disappear. That look dissipates and is only necessary for a certain amount of time. One other thing we've done summarily is that I've tried to educate, and I'm a parish, so I'm educating associate rectors, formation leaders, and program directors. I try to educate them in the language. They say, I'd like this branded, but what they're really looking for is a supportive graphic that everything can contain. And so I try to move them from this idea of having a total look to having something that says what you're doing, or says what the program is, or says what you want to communicate. That graphic can certainly appear everywhere, but it'll appear under the larger branding of the church itself. But it gives them a chance to feel strongly that they have this picture, and yet not to distress the brand by trying to insert that picture in a place where it'll cause some disruption in how people see it.
Since you were talking about pictures, that makes me think about photography. And even if you're not changing the overall branding of an event from year to year, you can certainly use different images that reflect maybe how it's changed a little bit from year to year.
Good idea.
So that's, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay,